Hello and welcome. It has now been 3 years in 3 where at least one of Chad Warner or Isaac Heeney has gone berserk against the Blues, and it's had a really strong bearing on the result of each game. Now, when I actually watch back the game, Chad Warner and Isaac Heeney's games were actually not as impactful as the stats may suggest. I think a perfect way of summarising that is through Isaac Heeney's third quarter. While the period reaped 15 disposals, it also reaped a 47% disposal efficiency with 3 behinds. A lot of contested footy, his score involvements only came in the form of behinds, nothing more. Only a couple of clearances as well. Though, while the stat line may be deceiving in terms of how it aligned with their impact, that's not to say they weren't impactful. Make no mistake, this game was an absolute slog. And so, the game was decided off the back of a few vital junctures in play, and this is where Chad Warner and Isaac Heeney come in. Even if those two may not have been impactful for the vast majority of the game, heck, they were operating at a sub 60% disposal efficiency all night. They had quite a few of these moments that were worth their weight in gold. Chad Warner in the previous 3 matches, he's placed in the top 3 for impact. Make sure to throw this fact in the back pocket for later. Even though Sydney have ended up at the other end of the spectrum for scores inside 50 this season, Carlton by game's end were the team suffering from this most. While these moments were only fleeting, Chad Warner and Isaac Heeney were major catalysts for the win, whilst Carlton not only contributed to their own collapse, but actually played into Warner and Heeney's dominance. Let's break it down. Now, let's remove the stat from the back pocket and go back to this. Chad Warner, top 3 in impact on the ground for his last 3 matches. In periods of dominance in these games, Warner garners a high amount of possession, and a fair chunk of these are in the forward half, or are a part of build-up chains. Now, when Carlton racked up 10 intercepts in 1 quarter to start the game, applied a crap ton of pressure, and spent a substantial amount of time in the forward half, this is when Heeney and Warner were almost unsighted when that ball was held in Carlton's back half. If you look at their respective heat maps for disposals on the night, it speaks to that. Heeney didn't get a kick in the first. As for Warner, he had 4 score involvements from 5 scores. This speaks to the impact when it did exceed halfway for Sydney, and it also speaks to how sparing these moments were early on, or even for the entirety of the game, but also shows how weighted these moments are towards an impact from someone like a Warner. As the ascendancy shifted into the Swans' favour, this came with the territory component. Carlton lost the possession count by 17 in the 4th quarter, but more devastatingly, 26% of those came in the forward half. More devastatingly, Nick Blakey had more disposals than what he had accumulated in the 3 quarters preceding, indicating these forward half chains weren't lasting and or weren't fruitful for Carlton. And even more devastatingly, with this known, 16 of the 22 players on field in the last operated at under 70% disposal efficiency. Now, Sydney weren't excluded from this struggle either, but what I'm trying to say is Carlton could not advance the football, and this is where you practically unlock Heeney and Warner's entire game. Not to mention, a lot of people have said Carlton did not lay enough attention into these guys. I think that's a common misconception. When you're constantly butchering the ball and turning it over, your entire team is displaced positionally, and that has a knock-on effect with your ability to contain these guys. That's where I think the real impact was had. These are the kinds of examples I want to highlight today. And as I've said, while there's only a few, the bearing this had on the game was drastic. The first one that springs to mind is this one, coming at a critical stage of the final quarter whilst we're leading. We get a mark on centre wing and George Hewitt is beside Chad Warner, which was a common theme for much of the game. The lack of handball to Walsh and some critical defensive coverage by Cleary were huge elements to this sequence, forcing the ruckman to kick and the bodywork completely discards Curnow as the kick falls short. Lewis Young isn't used aerially, so that deems him a fair liability given his manning Blakey. And you can see there's a spare player for the Swans centrally. Hewitt collapses to pressure Blakey. Walsh has also been drawn in, and Jesse Motlop is accounting for that spare they had in the middle, which creates this situation. Wicks, Motlop's man, marks the ball. Chad Warner and Florent, Walsh and Hewitt's men, a goal side, and that forces a roll-up which elicits this response. A goal from Grundy. Warner's handball receive carried over the impact from a daring kick by Blakey, but one simple misdirect of a kick meant the entire team defense was displaced, and that's where outcomes like these occur. Here's another example late in the contest. It's George Hewitt on Isaac Heeney this time. With the Swans up 11, they have men behind the ball in response to Carlton having men behind the ball. Hewitt takes part in the back 50 exit, though Sydney's collapse is excellent, and Carlton really don't have the support runners to chain themselves out of the 50, hence an irrational hand pass to nobody. That now also means that Hewitt is yet again displaced, and Heeney is just cherry-picking over the back, as he has never moved, or has barely moved. When the kick re-enters 50, you don't have that level of defensive attention because the main assignment has vanished. Of course, we're talking about Hewitt here. And I guess there's a component of accountability required here as well. As a result, Heeney strolls into an easy shot at goal, which he converts. Another example of this mechanism working damagingly. Here's another example that occurs in the third quarter. Carlton have just won a free kick, courtesy of Adam Chera, who tells the lads to calm the play down. Warner is by himself in midfield, while Heeney is doing the same, playing zonally as a part of the Swans' defense on the outer side. One errant kick and Carlton are knocked off their pedestal, with the Swans readopting their status atop of the ledger, with both Heeney and Warner off the leash. Heeney heads into the corridor, and instead of a midfielder tracking, you've got Francis Evans as a small forward, now turning into a defender. Look, this isn't acceptable within 3 seconds for Warner to have, I'd say, 5 meters on his opponent. But Francis Evans is more conditioned to lose his opponent, not track back and have to stop his own type. Haynes tracked back into the defensive 50 with Heeney, and he's gambled losing 10 meters on Heeney to try and win the ball defensively and switch the play where Carlton actually have somewhat of an infrastructure to do that. The minute Young ignores this and another turnover occurs, Carlton are yet again displaced defensively. We've got forwards on the last line, and yet again, I think accountability is an issue. Elijah Hollands was guarding a lot of space on this sequence, given the defense were in disarray, so he should be communicating and calling for help. Instead, this closeout to the marker, which happens to be Heeney, is just fractionally too late, as he tries to cover 2 players. As we have depicted already, turnovers is the death of the franchise. And look, this one's a little bit looser. I wouldn't say Carlton's defense is necessarily displaced, but an ineffective Carlton clearance that leads to a turnover has Sydney get both of their guns properly involved in an attacking sequence earlier in the game, which, as we've mentioned, didn't come regularly early on, but when Sydney did get entry into their front half, these two were a lot less absent. It starts with Heeney getting the Hewitt attention. Warner's in the attacking 50. Sydney rebound after Pitnet's kick lacks depth, and that is key because a kick off the ground gets it past centre wing despite the inefficiency. The Swans are clean at ground level, and even despite Carlton lining the contest on the defensive side, Heeney snuck out behind. Rowbottom gets the hands clear, and Sydney attack from back to front. Despite the congestion, any large amount of power on the handball will free Heeney up with the space over the top. Hewitt snapping has meant the Sard resource gets used with little to no effect. And that gap that Heeney gained on Hewitt initially is how McGovern gets sucked in, and we get subjected to Warner's class. This one's a lot more on a player like Hewitt, who has that responsibility with his assignment. But the turnover caused in way too shallow of a position means this impact is leading to a direct goal scoring opportunity, even with a fair bit of inefficiency as a part of the chain. And let's take an example like this, which is similar to the Heeney goal before in terms of game situation. The lead is at 11. Isaac Heeney, like a number of Swans midfielders, are occupying territory at about 50 to 70 metres from goal, which is why a kick like this from Ollie Hollands is incredibly valuable. Not only have you found a man wide open in the middle of the ground, but it's rendered this whole defensive line useless. That is until the mark gets dropped, and George Hewitt is defending Isaac Heeney passively because we were supposed to have the ball, but he's disadvantaged now, and Isaac Heeney is free. He's able to utilize a man in the wide positions, and this play, even for its lack of goal scoring output, is massively damaging given the game situation. Not only did Carlton lose their attacking capability, another gut punch added to a series of these cases in the fourth quarter, but yet again, was it another example of letting a player like Heeney have strong impact in a more attacking position. These are the most clear examples for me, and while I do feel as if Carlton definitely had some issues accountability-wise with these two individuals, especially in certain high-impact moments, and for that you can definitely question how they covered these two, I felt that when Carlton really had a chance to swing the game back in their favour, they didn't. They really could have wiped out Heeney and Warner's impact as they reverted to a more attacking profile of play. But it was another fade out in skill and execution which we bared witness to, and the fans, just like Michael Voss, were justifiably pissed. 5 examples I've picked out, 3 goals, 1 for the Swans. How about that for impact? What do you think? If you looked at Chad Warner and Isaac Heeney's stats, would the eye test tell you otherwise? And do you feel as if Carlton left their matchups out to dry with turnover, or it was simple defensive discipline that let them down? I look forward to seeing what you have to say. We'll chat to you all next week for one more Carlton analysis before the bye. But until then, thanks for tuning in, stay safe, and bye for now.